What is up? Profit and productivity, productivity and profit. We're either in the Facebook group or listening on the podcast. Maybe it's on Instagram. I don't know where this goes anymore. But let me tell you the biggest reason why some of the smartest people I know, some of the most educated, most technically correct, technically sound people I know have a really hard time selling stuff to people. They have a hard time helping people because technically sound people, service providers, technicians, have a different base knowledge. They tend to be technically correct. Now, the problem is when you're technically correct, if you're a PhD in metabolic chemistry and you say something that is technically correct, you have created confusion for people that don't have the same base knowledge. They're not reasoning from the same base of knowledge, right? So here's the thing. People move when you have given them what technically is called information, when you've closed the uncertainty gap. So if they're uncertain about what's on the other side, right, of this thing, they're less likely to take a step. Okay. Now, when you're technically, if you have a high base knowledge, you have a great knowledge, a great vocabulary, and you remove ambiguity from your speech because you are a technician, and you say something technically correct, if I don't have the same base knowledge, you've actually widened the gap of uncertainty, right? So if a PhD in metabolic chemistry again says, well, actually, that increases insulin sensitivity to a point of yada, 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 you go, well, what the hell is that? I don't want to take that step because I don't know what that means, right? So you're reasoning from a different base knowledge. So two things happen when you say something to somebody as a technician. It's either information. Information means there's this uncertainty, there's this gap, and you've said something that minimizes the gap. Innovation is when you say something and it creates a greater gap. What's happening is most, I say smart people, but the reality is most educated people have a different base knowledge. They overestimate everybody else's base knowledge, underestimate theirs. So we think we're having a face-to-face conversation, an eye-to-eye conversation, and we're not. Okay? So in our marketing and our sales, we're saying helpful things, but it's only helpful to people that have the same base knowledge as us, who don't need us because they have the same base knowledge. Right? And so that's what's happening is people are becoming more experienced, more educated, and that their base knowledge is increasing, and they forget the base knowledge of the people they're talking to. There's a systematic way of removing uncertainty. I teach it in the R3 class. It's removing uncertainty. It is turning innovation into information to lessen the gap, right? So it's good to learn. It is not good to forget the base knowledge from which your prospects and clients are operating from. Because you could very well say to me, well, yeah, at that point, well, it's an S-shaped curve, and at market saturation, it goes asymptotic. I go, okay, cool, that makes sense. If you don't know what any of that means, I just made it harder to buy for me because I have increased the uncertainty, right? So information to one is innovation to another. What minimizes the gap to people like you makes the gap wider potentially for your clients. So hopefully that makes sense. We have to, I always say, mind the gap. Understand the difference between the base knowledge you are reasoning and working from and the base knowledge of the people you're trying to help. And if you want to be helpful, you have to bring your communication all the way down to their base knowledge. You could be technically correct all day long and people won't buy stuff from you. It is only when you eliminate uncertainty and get them to take action because they are comfortable do they buy stuff from you. There's a framework for this. There's actually 5 decisions. There's 8 phases of the client journey. There's 5 decisions that need to get made at every single phase, and it's an opportunity to lessen the gap of uncertainty. There's actually 6 different ways to do that, maybe 7 if you count the fact that like we can do all kinds of crazy stuff with communication. We can text a video. It used to be text and video or 2 separate ways to communicate. Now you can text a video. So there's a lot of different ways to close this gap, but there's a systematic way of doing it that generates a ton of money and closes that gap of uncertainty. You go to r3class.com. I'm teaching it live. It starts January 6th, but it'll be available afterwards as well. Obviously not the live component. r3class.com. And the whole thing is built for a real service provider to mind the gap and get people comfortable, right? Oftentimes we think we're saying something that is so simple and we're confusing people with that simple statement. Doesn't help anybody, right? At some point you got to decide, do I want to be helpful or do I want to be right? Being helpful is going to make you a lot more money and you're going to help a lot more people. And if you want to do that, you're going to need a framework. If you want to keep getting smarter and more experience while continuing to be helpful to the people that have that base knowledge that you started with, you have to have a framework for it. I have that at r3class.com. I also share a lot of it around here, so just click around and look at stuff. But r3class.com, I'm going to teach it live. It's going to be a lot of fun. And remember, just always mind the gap, right? The bigger that gap, you might impress the shit out of somebody, and all you've done, every time you impress them more, you push them further away from ever working with you.